Hi everyone, I'm Alarka, and I'm here today to talk about one of my solutions to my uh, to Biggie Mac 42's puzzle, Amalgamated Gold Ring, which he added as part of the as week 2 of the 2020 opus-magnum-tournament. And so this is a really interesting puzzle. For this week, Biggie Mac decided to choose two different categories. The first category is to optimize area followed by cycles, and the second category is to optimize throughput um, followed by cost. And so throughput is a really interesting metric. It's not one of the usual metrics that the game supports, but it basically captures the idea of getting a fast and efficient solution, but one that doesn't use any weird tricks to get an output in an early cycle and not have in a way that isn't really repeatable. And so I'll show you from one of last year's puzzles, creative accounting, which I eventually got down to 22 cycles. I'll just show you that how the difference between cycles and throughput. So in this cycle, this puzzle is similar, lots of purification and projection going on. We need to disassemble this input, turn it into a single gold output. But here, this ninth input actually gets disassembled in a very different way in order to get these quicksilvers to project this gold sooner. And we end up with 2 waste iron, or actually several waste pieces that we have to sort of bring out of the way. This iron here, this attachment. And those aren't very helpful to us. And in fact, we'll see that this solution doesn't loop. If I do it again, I have more waste I need to crash. We could change this so that it will work. Like this could just make an infinite waste chain. But if you look, you'll see there's a lot of cycles wasted here at the end where everything's just resetting. And that means that if we tried to make it loop, it would still take a lot of time. Whereas this solution was the basis of that solution. This is a 23 cycle solution. But unlike the previous one, okay, this one has a bug. Maybe this one works. Okay, apparently all my solutions don't work. Maybe this one does. I haven't touched these in a while. Yeah, so, come on. Yeah, so as you can see, this is a 23 cycle solution, but it never stops. It will loop infinitely, dropping golds very rapidly. And this is the key difference that Biggie Mac is trying to get at with the puzzle for throughput, is to make a puzzle that is fast, that gets as many outputs as you can, but that doesn't have that sort of cheating where you grab an extra input or where you leave waste behind in an awkward way. It's not just to get to the 6th output, it's to get to infinity outputs as quickly as possible. And one actual other difference is that we don't actually need to go as quickly as possible because we're going over the long run. When we go for our throughput solution, we can take as long as we like to drop off the first input, as long as the machine drops them off with full throughput after that. So with that in mind, let's talk a bit about the puzzle itself, because the first thing you want to do with any sort of speed type optimization, whether it's cycles or throughput, is you want to understand what are your inputs, what are your outputs, and how are you putting them together. In this case, we have 2 inputs and 1 output. We've got a quicksilver and iron and lead in quicksilver, and we need to make an output with 4 quicksilvers and 2 gold. Now, there's a couple of different ways to think about full throughput. Biggie Mac gave a definition on his on the contest, which is designed to make it so that we're trying to keep a number down, we're trying to minimize. But the way that I like to think about it simply is you want to be either pulling inputs or dropping outputs as fast as you can. Almost always it's going to be pulling inputs, but there are some exceptions, like litharge separation is an infamous puzzle where the problem is that you have a giant output and you're trying to break it apart and throw everything into a single hex output. But with some exceptions, usually the limiting factor is the inputs. You have an output that's way bigger than the inputs here, so this is no different. And so the important things are really that we're pulling from the input from the inputs here every 2 cycles, and that given that we're doing that, we need to be dropping as many outputs as we can. If we do that, then unless we have some weird thing where like some weird chart where you like the inputs slow down or the outputs slow down over time, then you're going to have a perfect throughput solution. So one naive way to do this would be to like, I don't know, every two inputs you project lead first up to tin and then to iron, and then from there you can use the projection glyph to go iron, iron makes copper, copper, copper makes silver, silver, silver makes gold, and then grab some quicksilvers and throw them on. Or maybe you do two of the last projections, so you do like iron, iron makes copper, and then you're grabbing off extra quicksilvers to make the ring. There's a lot of different possibilities for how you go about this. So how do we know the best one? I've seen that on the Discord there's been a lot of people who aren't familiar with optimizing purifijection puzzles, and really there's a lot of cool mathematical theory that you can apply to this, but it's a bit of a bigger hammer than we really need. The important thing is we want to always be using the projection glyph for the highest tier of metals that we can. And if we look at this chart, we can actually sort of understand why, because every time we use a projection glyph, we take a quicksilver plus a metal to get a higher metal. Every time we use a purification glyph, we take two of the same metal to get the higher metal. So if we want to make a gold out of just lead, we need 32 lead. 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, 1. If we have one quicksilver though, where do we want to use it? Well, it's at the last step, because a silver takes 16 lead to make up, and so 16 lead makes a silver. A silver takes, 16 lead makes a silver, plus a quicksilver gives a gold. If we use the quicksilver all the way down here with the tin and lead, well, that only saves us one lead. And so basically the way that I like to think about it is that depending on where you use your quicksilvers, they're worth a certain number of lead. And that's how I did my math formulas to work out the maximum. There's a complex theory called linear optimization, and I want to do a post about what it is and how it's useful for these sorts of problems. But in the context that we have here, all we really need to know is, first we want to get we always want to be projecting silver to gold if possible. Only once we've got all of the silvers being turned into gold by projection do we start using the remaining quicksilver to project copper into silver. And if we filled that up, we would start projecting iron into copper and so on. That's the most efficient way of our quicksilver, which means we're going to get the most gold from however many metals we bring in, and that means we're going to get perfect throughput. So the way we want to start this off is by working out what ratios we're looking at, how many inputs per outputs, and what paths are we taking to get there. Unfortunately, I don't really have a good way to show off the math in this video today, at least the basic math to get the numbers that I got to, but it works out to 80 to 21. Every 80 inputs will produce 21 outputs. And the basic idea is that for 21 outputs, I need to make 42 silver, all of which I project. And that will use up that'll use 42 quicksilvers. 21 outputs themselves use up 84 more quicksilvers, so that makes 125, I think. No, sorry, 126. And the remaining 4 silvers we'll use to project copper into silver, which will then project into gold. The rest of the coppers will be blended together by purification to make the rest of the silver. And we'll be making those coppers with 2 irons make 1 copper, and we'll have, over a course of 180 inputs, we'll have 80 iron, so we'll get 40 copper, and we'll also get an additional 5 copper from the, no, 6 copper from the tin, or sorry, from the lead, which is, no, it is 5, isn't it? Yeah, it's 5 copper, or 5 copper, because it takes 16 lead to make a copper, and we have 80 inputs, so we'll get 5 copper out, plus the 40 gives us 45, and then, as I said earlier, we'll project 6 of those into silver, and then the remaining 39, I think, end up getting purified. No, that doesn't matter. Anyway, it works out. Trust me, it works out because the solution works. I'll write up the math somewhere rather than waste your time with this. And so basically, the way it ends up working is we need to pull a total of 6 iron off of here. Or 6 of the copper that we get from the iron will need to go on a separate pipeline to be purified because it's 10 copper from the, oh yes, no, that's it. It's 10 because it's only 3 stages, so it's only 8 each. So we get 10 copper out of the lead, and then add 6 copper from the iron over, purify that to get 8 silver, and that gives us a total of 42 silver, which is exactly what we need. Again, I'll put the math in the description or link it or something. Don't worry about it yet. But when I looked at this, there are a couple of ways that I thought I could go about it. One way would be to do 3 different pipelines, one for when we just do iron into copper, project it twice into gold, one for the lead, and one for the iron that gets where we purify the copper instead of projecting it. But then I realized that was probably not the best way to do it because all of these, the copper that come off here, we either want to purify them or project them directly into silver. And so I figured, well, why don't we try and make it a pipeline where the main pipeline, which is 34 out of 40 iron, we do the double projection. But occasionally, 34 out of 40 copper on the main pipeline, copper from the iron. We'll pull those off and make room to put a purification glyph. So we'll sort of slip them out, purify them into silver, and then slip the silver back into the main pipeline. And you can see this idea in my first solution attempt here. And so this one is just the main pipeline. So if my memory serves, this one will loop. And here, this is just how does the entire thing go together. So what do we have going here? So I've got, oh, this one actually doesn't loop because it doesn't drop off the waste, which is fine. I guess I was just working on this. All right, so this should work. Yeah, okay. So here's what we do is we grab the irons, throw them onto this purification glyph, and then we project it with once here, and then once over here, and it's turned into gold down here, and attached to the quicksilvers, which come off the lead to make the product. This actually works out really conveniently because for every 2 irons that we pull in here, we get 2 quicksilver, which we can, and then we can, once we purify the iron to copper, we can project it twice into gold. And at the same time, we pull 4 inputs down here, getting 4 quicksilver, which we use in the output. So this is actually sort of like a really convenient layout, and because it means we don't have to cross the quicksilver streams. We have 2 separate streams where we don't need to worry about. And right now I've just got the lead being discarded. So my idea, and I built this with that in mind, was to sort of put a purification glyph somewhere like here maybe. And then instead of grabbing the copper from here and swinging it down to the projection glyph, instead what we'll do is we'll swing it down to the purification glyph when there's a copper ready to be purified. Then we'll skip this projection glyph and we'll send the quicksilver off to be a part of the final product. Sorry, the sort of extra product, because I'll explain the product math in a bit. But then it would swing over from here. The silver swings from here onto this projection glyph here and turns into a gold. And then that way we don't need to do anything special in this part of the quicksilvers. We always just project a gold here. So this one is producing 1 output for every for every 4 pairs of inputs that are pulled, which is 1 in every 8. And we can see that here. Let's run. So it drops 1, and then if we speed forward to here, we'll have the next one ready. So that's 1 in every 8, and this is the core loop. This is our 80 outputs for 20 inputs. Now, the whole step is, how do we get that 21st output? How do we manage to put together these leads that are getting purified and disposed of, and these extra quicksilvers, which we will pull off of this main line? How do we turn those into a main product? And so after working on that, I developed a version with copper injection. This is a very different solution, but you can still see this part of the pipeline down here is very similar to the previous version. I still do this swinging effect, and I still use the triplex bonder to assemble the output like this. In fact, this is the one thing that did not change at all throughout the entire solution, as well as the way that I use the track to build, to do the purification and projection here. Just if I go back, you can see you can see it's at a different angle. What actually ended up happening was I first started rotating, I think it was this part of the puzzle, or of the solution, and then I started rotating this part of the solution, but this stayed unchanged. And that's why in this one, we still have the same relative orientation of this triple bonder and the output. And this will stay pretty much unchanged. I think I spun it once more before the final version, but pretty much this arm, this triplex bonder, this swing down, and this drop off are pretty much going to be unchanged in terms of their mechanics. So the biggest change up here from the previous version of this solution is I now only have one glyph of projection up here. I realized that there was no real need to have this swinging effect where we have 2 separate quicksilver pipelines and then we swing the silver across. Because of the quirks of timing of projection glyphs, it's actually really, really easy to let multiple quicksilvers hit the same atom on them. And I'll take advantage of this later. Actually, you can see it already where I've got the copper injection going. This mess up here was awful. I was not looking forward to cost optimizing it. But then I realized I could just slow the arms down. The whole point there, by the way, is just to delay the quicksilver to the projection glyph so that it arrives when the copper does. Because the iron here has to go through a purification, whereas the quicksilver, if I brought it straight there, would result in a collision. And so I drop, swing it over, swing the next one over. In the meanwhile, we have this pipeline down here, which is actually doing the purification to make copper. And now this is the key idea that I had when I was first building this solution, was normally this copper would extend out to here, and then we'd apply projection and swing it down. Instead, we swing it down here. Then grab the silver, push it forward, and now it's turned into a gold because the quicksilver was here already. Swing it down, and no one's the wiser. You'll notice that when that happened, I have to restart because this doesn't loop. You'll notice there's a gap in the quicksilvers here. That's because we don't need a quicksilver for projection. Instead, this arm drops it into the glyph of disposal to get rid of it. And the last quirky thing here is you'll note here the timing. Actually, no, this version doesn't have it. The timing ends up being slightly different on the silver getting the projection glyph, but again, that's me taking advantage of the wonderful timing properties of projection. Because every projection glyph fires twice in a cycle at the start and the end. So you can actually project the same atom twice in a cycle, like on the cycle where you do an arm swap on it, and that can be really valuable. Next up is the version that actually worked. Where was that? Oh, here it is. So this is the actual version, my first full throughput solution that works wonderfully. Well, works really well. It's pretty But importantly, this is the point where I've optimized the main metric of throughput. And you'll see here where I'm doing this and I'm building up this quicksilver here. And now when this next copper comes up, instead of, wait, no, it's not that one. Here we go, yeah. So this one, instead of dropping it off and doing this sort of steal that I did before, we grab the next copper and now we project these coppers into silver. We use this silver, project it to gold, and then do a bunch of work over here to assemble the output. Meanwhile, we've got another copper coming up to make silver, to make gold. And now that that output is together, I passed it down, back down here, where this arm could pick up. And as the rest of the puzzle operates, this output is slowly going to work its way around and eventually get dropped off. So I was pretty happy with this one because it worked. And there's not really much more you can ask for when you're working on a tough puzzle like this one. This particular arrangement of glyphs here ends up being pretty close to mandatory because of the way that I want these arms to swing down with the gold. The only option that I had to sort of change this around is I could swing, I could rotate this, I could rotate this, like I could do this, but you'll later see that as I optimize this stopped being an option, and so I really didn't have a lot of room to work with here. I really need these projection glyphs or purification glyphs to be close together. It's probably not strictly necessary in maybe a higher area version where there's more swinging between. But the critical thing for this one is that I use a single arm to go in both here and here. And so there wasn't a lot of room to move these things around, which later on turned out to be a big problem for me. So once I had a working throughput solution, that means that the next step is to start working on the second metric, which is cost. Right now I have a cost of 995 gold, and so I thought about this, what do I want to get rid of? Well, pistons are expensive. This arm here really isn't using its track too much, which would let 9, like, this is just awkward. I really want to be able to drop on the output right away so that this can move freely and not be and not have to be a piston, because then it could just slide back on the track. This piston, I wasn't really sure how am I going to get copper up here without a piston, but I later managed to do it with an arm, with a longer arm on a track by changing the arrangement down here. And this piston, the other thing was like, how do I build the output? And of course, maybe I can get rid of these arms up here, bring things down, because I've got a lot of arms devoted just to moving these quicksilvers down and back up. So maybe there's some way to like get the output to a more convenient location. The other thing I thought about was, can I reduce glyphs? Can I put more atoms into a single position at the same time? Purification is pretty obvious. So you can merge two purification glyphs here and merge the iron with the lead to do them on the same glyph. Annoyingly, you need an extra arm for that, because if you just try and do it with these two arms, it ends up taking 17 cycles to make a loop when you want it, and you need it to take 16. So you don't actually get any benefit there, but I like the aesthetic of it. And it can be really useful for space saving if space is an issue. On the other hand, it may actually be better to spread it out. Oh, sorry, actually, yeah, an arm costs the same. But yeah, it can be better to actually spread it out, because like if I reused and bumped this onto the same glyph, then I'd need to move the result copper even farther. So whether you want 2 or 3 purification glyphs here really depends. of course, these tracks, if I can simplify them, they're actually really expensive because they've got a lot of arms on them. Like this track up here, it's not as bad as the one you saw in the last solution, but it's still got 5 arms on 6 track, and that's 130 gold. That's how expensive. Finally, right, sorry, actually, back to glyphs. So I've got 2 unbonders. There's no way on Earth that these 2 unbonders are going to be deduplicated. They're way too busy. They're already at max throughput. This bonder is not at max throughput, but it's very busy, and it's really unlikely as well that I'm going to want to use something other than a triple bonder here. It might be possible, but I get so much advantage out of it. I get 4 bonds off of it every 8 cycles, and so that would be a single bonder at maximum throughput. So it would require perfect movement of the atoms to never miss a cycle, and that would be pretty incredible. This one, in theory, could be deduplicated against this one, but again, space is a problem. Like, how do I sneak in a full output onto this glyph while this glyph's really busy? Again, tons of arm manipulation required. Seems unlikely that it's going to be worthwhile. But what about this projection glyph? Well, on the face of it, it looks like it's really too difficult to swap these out or to merge these, because even though this glyph is only used twice, this is in the middle of the busiest pipeline in the puzzle. But I figured, hey, you know what? It's worth trying. There are some dead cycles on this because every time the copper comes up, we leave a gap. So maybe there's a dead cycle. Maybe what we do is, instead of passing Quicksilver down here so that we can bond on this silver, upgrade this silver, instead we leave the Quicksilver in the pipeline, move the silver up this way, grab the Quicksilver, and then have the Quicksilver escape. I was really surprised and excited when I got it to work. Where was this the one? I'm going to want to speed ahead here. Oopsie. All right, so here. So watch this. We go, yeah, here we are. We rotated the entire puzzle again. So once again, we have the same pattern where we have a copper ready to project against a copper incoming from the main pipeline. But this time, there's a silver that's been built up from purification that's left in the way. This arm advances the silver onto the projection glyph. The regular Quicksilver comes down. This arm swings back. This arm ducks down to grab the silver. We bring this silver up to purification, to projection to get the next Quicksilver. This one's now on the triplex bonder, but it's early, allowing it to escape and head up to this bonder in the north. And once I had that, suddenly I had managed to get the silver over to the other side. And that was a complete accident, but it was wonderful because it means I don't need all this anymore. Because all that I was doing here was passing a Quicksilver down so that we could build it up into an output with the silvers that come off here, and then I was passing it all the way back up. And so that meant that I could, instead of pulling the Quicksilvers down and around, I could pull them up this way and then build the output up in this area. And that's what you'll see here with this coming on. And this one's marked work in progress, so I think that means it doesn't loop. Yeah, it doesn't loop. But I was just super excited to have this working. Now this arm only needs to pull 2 atoms out of the main pipeline per gold that we generate. So 4 in total, make an output, and then we'll be able to drop it off. Coincidentally, this arm here is really nicely positioned to drop it off because it just goes right on the output from that bonder. And this arm sort of pulls backup duty on the main pipeline in order to make this work. The other, so the once I did this though, I noticed something that proved somewhat difficult and is part of why this solution doesn't work. And that is, let me find arm 9. So arm 9 is this arm here. It's the one that does the sends the copper usually to the projection glyph, occasionally to the purification glyph. And let me grab this arm 26 and bring it up here just for the sake of an example. So I'll put it between 29 and arm 10, which is 11 here, which is this arm here. So now our arm 26 is now 11, and there's a problem with the repeat. Because now this arm needs to behave differently when once it's dropping a copper off, like here, arm 9 grabs and pulls back instead of pushing forward. And arm 10, in the meanwhile, has a bunch of special stuff to do when we get this, once the silver is ready to get passed up into the main pipeline. Because then we grab the gold and swing it around. And we come to a problem later on here once we start getting to the repeat on the cycle. Oh, apparently the problem occurs earlier, but the real problem is here on the repeat. Because the earliest that I can drop off the last silver, the last copper here, ends up being slightly too late in order for arm 9 to be able to repeat properly, because it means that when I get to the next loop through, I guess sixth copper, whatever it is, the sixth time that arm 9 needs to pull back is on its 21st iteration. This instruction pipeline I have, unfortunately, is designed for a pipeline of 20 inputs, 20 repeats. And that means that in order to do it on the 21st iteration, it has to do it on the first iteration as well. And if I do it on the first iteration, I can show you that one. It will cause all sorts of terrible things because this won't get purified. There's going to be a collision between the quicksilvers. I mean, I could deal with that one, but the bigger problem is there's nothing to purify this copper against. It's just in the way. And so I couldn't figure out a good way to deal with that. It also looks like you might be able to just sort of delay, say, okay, the first copper pulls off, but then the problem is now these quicksilvers, you have to make them not arrive, and that means longer up here, and like it's just sort of a cascading what you have to do to delay this initialization. I also can't just make the tape longer. Like I can't go like, oh, I'll put the 21st input here, or sorry, the 21st iteration here, because no matter how long, I'll still have that one oddball iteration at the start, which means it will break the loop. And the reason that this previous solution worked is because it did the silver last. So I do 3 regular copper projections into the silver here, and then I work on, no, sorry, 4? Yeah, there's 4, and then the last coppers all go to the silvers, which we can work with here. But unfortunately, arm 10 is not so lucky. When we switch this over to, and that meant that the 10th copper was not being used to project with this one. It was being used to make the output instead, and that meant that we didn't need to worry about what was going on with the outputs here. But this creates a different problem when we get back to here. And the problem is now, I ended up moving the copper earlier in the loop, but now arm 10 runs into the same problem. Arm 10 wants to do special stuff in this segment of the loop, and if we try and pull all this off at the wrong time, it doesn't work because this arm can't grab, like it just doesn't have enough time to grab and swing this over. So the problem is now I can't just do the last copper bean to the alternate pathway to this output up here, because I need the cooperation of arm 10, and arm 10 needs to loop. And again, if I try and delay it till the end to save arm 9, then arm 10 doesn't loop properly and it doesn't work. So I ended up needing to find a way to delay the quicksilver. What I did is by delaying the first input here, so that I'd start here, then the 21st iteration over here-ish someplace that needed to pull this input out could pull it one sooner on iteration 20, and then it would loop properly. And that is, actually, I'm going to change this instruction back. That is what I came up with in this one. So here, I use an initialization loop. Just some arms that pull some quicksilvers out of the way, which delays the arrival of the first quicksilver, and then we're all good, because now it will loop properly. And I'll speed this up here. Right, when you finish the puzzle, it resets your speed. So we build an output up here. Arm 10 does a bonus swing up. Or no, sorry, that doesn't happen yet. Arm 12 will drop that off. And now it actually loops. And the cost has been reduced to 925 gold, which is a 70 gold saving between the one projection glyph and all of these arms along the outside. There's actually more savings too from some of the internal arms. You'll note that all the pistons are now gone, because this extra initialization is actually really expensive. Like, I've got 60 gold in the arms and then 7 pieces of track, so that's almost 100 gold in itself. So I could get this down to 835 gold if I could just get rid of this initialization. The reason it's so big and expensive is just because basically any other position I tried to go to, the arms would bump into atoms and try and grab them at the wrong time, which was problematic. So the next step that I set out to do was to remove this initialization. And that is this one. 860 gold, massive improvement. I was super happy with this. This is the first one that I was really satisfied with. And the trick is just to use more arms in the middle to delay the first quicksilvers arriving. And otherwise, it's pretty much the same as the previous solution. This 6-arm acts as a nice clock, and these 2 arms and this arm over here let these inputs slow down. They end up taking just long enough to let us delay that last copper and make the puzzle loop. So can we do better? Yeah, I found a improvement here of 40 gold by eliminating these 2 arms here, 20 and 21. And that was done by making the arm formerly known as arm 18 into a much bigger arm, and having it actually take more rotation. So there's more delay that just comes from arm 20, and now arm 21 is still here. It swings things up. An extra 10 gold went to changing arm 22 into a double arm so that it can actually get around in time. Also, as part of this, I ended up having to come up with a new way to make this contraption in the top work, and I really liked this. The basic reason for that was to get arm 9 out of the way. I needed to, I didn't actually need to do this as it turns out, but it ended up being better. Actually, no, I can't actually remember what sort of piece it was, but the position of arm 9 was one of the worst aspects of this puzzle, because I can't turn it into a piston. That's an extra 20 gold. And it absolutely needs to be on this L-shaped track. And it needs to be able to hit here, here, and here. So it can go here, can't go here, could maybe go here because of this arm, but this arm's in the way. Can't go here, could go here, But between fiddling with this mess and this mess up here, I ended up deciding that this was the best place to put arm 9. And that meant needing to move this out of the way. And that meant changing around the way that this upper section works. And so if we look at the previous version, we'll see we have this sort of like box shape with 6 track. And so I changed that into this loop shape. This saves a piece of track for an extra 5 gold. And it let me do something really clever with the outputs here, or sorry, with the quicksilvers, which is that these arms now actually grab off of this main track all on their own. And arm 12 is now no longer on a track, which saves another 10 gold. It is, and that's a major advantage. And that was the other aspect of these arms, was discovering that they could actually participate in the pulling off themselves rather than having arm 12 to do it. It allows them to bring things up here and gives me nice flexibility to hit both ends of the bonder, because previously arm 12 was mostly responsible for managing the bonder, which we'll see here. So arm 12 will pull off, but then it needs to do a bunch of adjustment with the track to access both sides of the bonder. That's no longer necessary with this solution, because the arms on this track will do it for us. They can hit the top and the gold will come in from the bottom, and arm 12, being a 1-length arm now, has tons of maneuverability, control over this small product that it's trying to put together. You see there that arm 10 actually has to jump up and give arm 12 some help, though, to make that first transfer after the gold drop. Where does that occur on the tape? Oh no, it's after the, darn, I just missed it. Here we go. So here, arm 10 swings up. Arm 11 fulfills its duty of passing gold over, while it swings around, drops this in a way that ensures that when the next gold comes up, it will bond properly. I couldn't find any other way to do it, but it actually works really well, because arm 11 isn't doing too much for most of the puzzle, or most of the solution, and so it has plenty of time to do this. And arm 10 does the same thing to drop the output. Arm 11 takes over, arm 10 swings up to grab it and drop it in. So I was really happy with this one. This was especially good after a lot of iterations here. An earlier version actually had these responsible for grabbing a piece that arm 12 put into position and just moving it, but arm 12 was still swinging things off. So it was really, really interesting to try and make it so that like this arm would like grab and then move and then let go as part of this loop, but this ends up being even cleaner. And so I decided to try and push it one more. I'm down to 820, which is I was really happy with, and I would have been happy to make this my final submission, but there's one more thing we can try and get rid of, and that is a second projection glyph. I know I said before that you don't save money because you have to add another arm, but I actually already have that extra arm here, I realized. Like, I need to get rid of a glyph, and I do need an arm to manipulate to help arm 25 and 23 on this purification glyph, but I already have it. It's already moving things from this glyph to this glyph. So I'm not actually saving, or I'm not actually losing money, and so it would be a 20 gold improvement. And boy, was that a lot of work. But it culminated in my final solution. I did a ton of experimentation here. The real problem here was just finding a position where arm 23 could drop things off, and then arms 24 and 25 could manipulate them in a way that I could still get this timing mechanism on arm 18 working, because this whole mechanism is very precise. I tried experimenting with moving the bonder up here and dropping, leaving this purification glyph in the same place as it was before, and then like trying to do a bond here, but that didn't work. I tried moving the arm here. That didn't work because it was more problematic that it was bumping in trying to grab here, but the real problem was the alignment up here, and also this swing. Trying to grab an atom, or no, sorry, putting the bonder here. Like trying to grab the atom here and then swing it across meant that the input needed to be like over here, and there just really wasn't a good way to make it all fit. And but the key insight, actually, the key thing that made this work was this changing the orientation of this bonder. It probably took me several hours to find this, because in the previous version it was like this, and then this would swing around, and then the atom would end up being the quicksilver pair would end up being here, which is where it needs to be. But I discovered I could do it like this, and use ARM21 to correct the orientation. So ARM21 swings up the first one up here, and the second one, it just spins it. That lets ARM18 get in, and then ARM22 has one spare cycle that it can use to actually rotate this molecule, and the entire thing works out. And this is how I ended up at my final submission, or my final submission unless I noticed something sudden for the conclusion of this tournament week. And 800 gold, which is almost 25% less than my original solve, and I'm really, really satisfied with it. This is it's really amazing to me that this gold steel trick works. It really simplified the whole thing by giving me a really nice working space here where I can easily pull the quicksilver up. The one thing I really don't like is this delaying mechanism, and I really wish I had a good way to get rid of it. But even then, like, if I go back to the one where I didn't have the waste pulled off, I had more space issues, and I was still 845. So there were some serious improvements that were made along the way. Doing the upper part though, like with arm 12 being a single arm and the semicircle up here, I could definitely do that on this one. But the real problem is just that delay, just making it loop. At one point, actually, I considered that my best way to do the delay might actually be to add another track here and an arm, and just have this arm handle the first iteration, and then have arm 9 do all of the others, and that would have saved me 15 gold, but I knew I could do better. Yeah, I actually did manage to get the one version where the bonder was up here, but then, or no, sorry, no, I had one version where the bonder was here and the unbonder was here, and that one worked really well. It let me get rid of one of these arms because the other one, 20 was replacing one of them, but that didn't work because there wasn't enough delay on the first set of quicksilvers. I really don't like all these track. These ones sort of at this point have become necessary in order to pull this swing, and I'm not sure you could do without them, but I really, really felt like there ought to be some improvement, like a triple arm that swings around or something. But every single version, single possibility that I thought of, like adding a second unbonder and swinging, none of them worked. Up here, the problem is with all this track and quicksilver, there just isn't enough room. And because of the delay, there isn't enough room for two separate quicksilver pipelines, and so a second unbonder doesn't work. And then down here, the problem is just the spacing around this big triple arm. There's just I wasn't able to find a good way to make it work, at least without requiring another arm. It'd be easy to do if I didn't need to keep the cost low. But this is my final solution. Oh no, this isn't my final solution. This one is. No. That was the earlier one. Where did it moved? This was the final solution. With that changed orientation here, moving this projection glyph down, and then you can see the iron gets swung out of the way, quickly swap back. This copper needs to swing around gets stored there and then gets swung around because if it's stored up here, arm 18 will grab it out of the way. Um, and that's also why you'll see arm 24 hesitate there because this projection glyph. Um, this is also incredibly timing sensitive on arm 9's repeat. The last copper gets delivered to the purification glyph on the same cycle by arms 9 and 24. And so even if this had to go one cycle sooner, if this mechanism down here was one cycle faster, then the entire thing wouldn't work. And yeah, and so that is my solution. And I'm really looking forward to seeing two things tomorrow and in the coming weeks and months, which is first off, everyone else's solutions. I'm really excited to see what people come up with. And also whatever Jinyo can do to improve my solution. Because I'm sure he's going to come up with something clever. Or maybe there's some clever track manipulation to eliminate this mess with the initialization. But if there is something like that, I wasn't able to find it. So yeah, actually, I guess I'll swap up to my area solution. I only made one real attempt on this one. 21 area, which is pretty good. It's I won't go into too much detail because I'm sure Biggie Mac will cover that pretty well. But just to talk a little bit more about my area solution and give you some to tide you over while Biggie Mac is working. 21 area, you have to have either two arms or a piece of track because you have a glyph of purification, and one stationary arm is just incapable of working with it. And everything else here is required except for this hex here. And the reason I need to have this hex is in order to rotate the solution onto the bonder. You'll see swing that up, swing it down, bond it, drop it. I needed to have that hex there. There's probably, in fact, I'm almost positive that someone's going to get a 21. The really good optimizers like Pentapig and Jinyo, I expect will have 21. And where you just have the glyphs differently, like if you did something like this, something in this vein, maybe like that. Actually, you know what? Now that I look at that, that probably works fine. Great, now I need to figure out whether I can get this done in time, but there won't be a separate video for it. Yeah, the only thing which is worth of any interest about this solution, I think, is the way that it assembles the output. It goes to 4 atoms, and then doesn't build the 6th atom on, or the 5th atom on. Instead, it bonds it to the gold. And the reason for that is because when I do this final swing here, this bond, or this gap is 120 degrees away from the bonder here. And that turned out to be really important because this was the only manipulation that I could do that let me rotate this without taking up more area. And so I had to rotate it 120 degrees at a time, 60 degrees. There's just no way to do it. And yeah, other than that, it's yeah, I guess it just speaks for itself, really. But yeah, I'm sure Biggie Mac will tell you more about area solutions. And this is not cycles optimized at all. I mean, I tried to do my best, but I am not good at area cycle optimization, really. I don't know how the efficiency tricks for these tiny spaces. And yeah, that is my amalgamated gold ring solutions, or at least the throughput solution. Maybe I'll have an improved area one by the time the tournament is over tomorrow. But thank you all for taking the time to watch this. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll try and remember to put some links in the description explaining more about the theory of purifijection and of complex products in general. So with that, I'll head out and see you all in the results.